wanted to try a silly kind of hands-on example to build up a reason why indexers exist. Not to go so deep into covering all the ways to implement one, but just in case you've been hearing this word around the ecosystem and you're wondering, what indexers? Why do I need that? I'd like to try to answer that question here. All right. And so let's back up for just a moment and head over to the course examples. Oh, please. And this is going to get us up to speed on the prior examples from this module, right? I can connect a wallet. And when I do, I can see some information in the other examples. For example, I can see that I have minted a token, for example, and now I have access to this very simple application. That's all well and good. But often we need to get information from the rest of our blockchain and not only from our wallet. And so what you saw in the previous lessons is that we can query the blockchain with Blockfrost or with Maestro or by using built-in mesh providers that service Blockfrost, Maestro, and other services. And in any of these cases, we can hit an endpoint and get some data. Fine. And if you want to see the source code for this example, once again, go back to lesson 204.1. But here's the core problem that we might start looking at. If our goal was to have a list of tokens minted with some policy ID, of course, we can always make a query to somebody else's API, to the Blockfrost API or the Maestro API. And if we do that, that query is going to be run every time somebody looks at the web page, because the way we've implemented it so far, this is just running in the browser. It's making this query on demand, and it's pulling this data into the user's browser. But I hope you might start to wonder, isn't that inefficient, right? A Blockfrost or a Maestro call costs money. What if there was a way to not have to rely on hitting that service over and over again? Because the blockchain, once there's blocks on it, it's not going to change, right? This list of tokens that was minted between, say, March and September of this year, that's already on chain. And I don't have to worry about that current data changing. There might be new data in that data set, right? And so what if we could just keep some kind of list off chain and we only need to update it when a new token is minted? And if you understand that idea, right, keeping something separate from the blockchain that's updated when certain kinds of transactions happen, now you've got the basic idea of what indexers do. And if you don't have a full idea yet, I'd like to actually just be the indexer. I'm going to show you doing by hand the long way what the indexer sort of does. And that's going to allow us to think about how efficient it is to do it by hand. And once again, why an indexer is helpful. So let's look at just a little bit of the code here. There's an example for this component. Where is it? I think it's in the, whoops. Let's go 204.1. We've got some examples here. This was the token datum. Go back to that lesson. Where was that example? In query by policy ID. That's what we'll use. Query by policy ID was our example of a Blockfrost query. Yeah, and there's a line commented down here. So obviously you can console log data anytime, and sometimes you can just JSON stringify it if you want to just see some raw data on the screen. So that's what we're going to do here. And I think, oh, I need to working on a different computer today. Give that just a second to update. And you'll see this on my screen in just a second, but the idea here is we can just look at the raw data of this query. We're going to be able to see it on the screen. Let's just get these updates. Mesh has been pushing all sorts of updates lately. This should be good now. Yeah, fine. Okay. And so I uncommented this string right here. And now I'm just going to run this server. And I'm going to open up this same page, but on local. Okay, we're loaded up. And now when I run this query, oh, do I not have, my fault. Give me 1 second here, guys. I'm sorry. Um, and what was just happening under the hood is I had to pull in the API key for block for us. I didn't have it locally here. Let's try that again, and we'll go back and look at that example. And I'll share screen again. Let's reload and try it now. There we go. Okay, so this right here, this is the result of just that raw JSON.stringify. And if I look at where this is coming from, this is the data that's being returned by this API call right here. Okay, so we're querying assets policy, this policy ID, looking at the raw data. What is that raw data? It's just a list of assets with an asset ID and a quantity. And I think all these quantities ought to be one because these were minted one of, right? When everybody mints their token. Fine. And of course, that being the raw data, here's a slightly more user-friendly version that still is not production ready, but just to show you, right? You can look at the source code to see how we're making sense of the raw data by just mapping over it and then converting a substring to the name you see here. Okay? But this raw data is what's in question. And if we go back to the example, you can see that, of course, anytime I can copy and paste this. Or a little more advanced way to do it, if I logged this to the console or even saved it as a file, TypeScript provides ways to do that. But we're really doing it the long way by hand right now. All I'm going to do is copy and paste the data I see right here into a file. In this example, just a tokens.json file in a data directory. And there it is. Once I have this, I can do something like this instead of using a live query. So let's just make a live update to this query by policy ID file. Okay. What we can do is we can say, let's just comment out the query in the first place. Let's pull in, whoops. let's pull in this import tokens line right here. And then there's a lot of stuff we're not going to need anymore. Okay, we're not going to need to set data as a use state hook, so I'll comment that out. We're not going to need any of this use effect because we're not making this query anymore. And we no longer need to toggle the fetching of the data, right? Because it's already here. It's just in this JSON file. So that's actually going to be really efficient. And I'm going to comment this line out again for now, but, oh, it's called data, but let's just call this tokens instead, because that's what we're calling it in our import, tokens. Okay. We can get rid of the button. And we've got some unused imports, but that's not going to hurt anybody. But I will need to just have an opening div here. How's that look? Okay. So we've got a couple of unused things, but we're not even going to keep this code right here. I just want to show you this example. That ought to work. Let's just run that server again. And there's something really important that's going to happen. Which is that the data is already here as soon as I load the page. And of course it is, right? Because it's right there in that JSON file that we were just looking at, right? Now, obviously, I'm cheating right now. The truth is, if you're running an indexer, you're still going to have to host it and serve it from somewhere. But the idea here remains. Now I've got some data that's off chain, and this is kind of an extreme and contrived example, but you can see that my app is more responsive. And so if you're going to build an indexer, you of course you should make sure that you can deliver one that's going to be at least as reliable as a service like Blockfrost or Maestro. And if you don't have the DevOps skills or the access to servers to do that, of course, those remain useful tools. But a lot of this is getting easier and easier with patterns showing up. Okay, so this is the example. And just to review, right? Steps 1 to 3 are actually really helpful for other reasons. When you're prototyping some application UI, when you're trying to go from something ugly like this list that doesn't really help me to some UI where you might make some sense of this data in a way that's helpful to users, this is actually a really good strategy. Yeah, just grab some raw data, slap it in a JSON file, and then prototype, right? Just play around with UI, play around with the structure of your components and colors, whatever else you want to play around with. That's fine. But step 4, I hope you recognize, is just ridiculous. You're not going to update a file by hand every time something happens on chain. And so now we come back to the original question. An indexer is going to help you automate this step of updating your trove of data over and over again. You can set up indexers to track the blockchain and to update stored data according to certain rules. And then you can look beyond that step and think about, okay, well, now that I have this raw data, maybe it's just a list of policy IDs, maybe it's just a list of raw transactions. You can now manipulate that data in any number of ways to make it useful. And you can deliver that processed data via an API endpoint that is reliable as you're able to build it. We're not going to go deeper into building indexers right now, but we encourage you to explore. Here's one public resource from Builderfest that happened earlier this year. A group of developers got together just to make a little mind map of the different indexers that are out there. So if you've ever heard any of these words, we were just looking at Blockfrost and Maestro. And here's some high level descriptions of those from the way a dev might describe it. And then here's other options for building indexers or things that serve a similar role. And this is a really, really nice place to start. Just Google any of these terms or search for these in the Discord server of your choice, see what you can find. So is this helpful? How are people feeling? Is anybody here who has heard this word indexers, but has not really wrapped their mind around what it is? Or maybe have you seen any of these words on the screen right now and been wondering what makes them special? Questions or thoughts? Harsha, what do you think?
I have a small question. So when I'm running the node, I see like a folder that says Cardano DB sync with the node. Is it the same thing? Am I directly like indexing using SQL?
Beautiful. Okay, great question. Yeah, so when you install Cardano Node out of the box, it comes with several different programs, right? And the two that we talk about the most are Cardano Node and Cardano CLI. But as you noticed, there's some other things there too, and DB Sync is one of them. It doesn't work automatically out of the box. Okay, so if you've ever looked at the config files for setting up, and you were just doing this over the last few days, right? So you've got the config files locally. You're able to reference the ones you need when you start up the node. But there's some other config files that are included optionally. And I think actually, let's go take a look at that. Can I find that real quick instead of just talking about it? Yeah, let's just look at it in a file explorer to make this make sense, right? So I've got the most recent node right here, and it comes with this share folder, and there's a pre-prod directory. No, it's not included directly there. Um, but the tools are there. DB. Okay, yeah, we got to go to the configs site. Here we go. So you see this guy right here, DB sync config. This is an additional config file. There's also the submit one, right? So these are the two things that if you're just running a local node to make sure you can do it, if you want to give yourself Cardano CLI functionality, you can safely ignore both of these. But these are going to help you kind of go to that next step of application building. And you need this config file to run DB sync. Now, that's only a tiny part of the story. DB sync takes an order of magnitude more time to sync from Genesis than just your node does. Because when you sync Cardano node, sure, you're getting the block history of the blockchain. But when you want DB sync to be fully up to date, that's basically giving you the table with basically all the available details of every transaction that's ever happened. And clearly that's a lot of data. So that's, and it's only becoming more data. So that takes time. And there's some nice solutions for not needing to do this from scratch. But this as well is a reason why indexers exist, because really recognizing for now at a high level, the thing you need to know is that running a full DB sync is very resource intensive. And if my goal is only to be able to see transactions that include a certain policy ID, and maybe that policy ID has only existed for the last 6 months, then of course I don't need to go all the way back in time and know the entire history of the blockchain, nor do I really want to use hard disk space to have all of the global transactions that are not relevant to my policy ID, right? But if I was running like a blockchain explorer, like Cardano scan, or if you were operating Pool Tool, or under the hood of GraphQL, which a lot of you guys are familiar with, DB Sync is running, right? And in order to be able to make a global GraphQL query, this is going to be required. What else are you thinking?